Hi, this time I wanted to talk about Silent Hill, the series of video games that you could use as a source of inspiration for your tabletop role playing games. That is, elements that we can take from those video games, that we can learn from them, and how you could choose a specific horror system or even universal or generic system to play a Silent Hill type of role playing game session, an entire adventure or an entire campaign. Before we start, I would like to talk about my introduction to Silent Hill. Well, throughout my life, I've always liked horror role playing games and board games, video games, but the way in which I got introduced to Silent Hill was very interesting, very horror themed in some ways. Many of you already know about the video games. There are a lot of psychopaths in those games. There are different elements that we will talk about in a few moments, but Silent Hill always has those characters, those people that seem quite alien. Despite being human, it's quite clear that they have some mental issues or problems. So when I first knew about Silent Hill was during this sort of school event. It was kind of like a trip. We spent a few days in a very creepy ranch, and well, it was a creepy experience not only because it was quite separated from civilization. The nights were pretty dark. There were rumors that the place was haunted, but because of the people that you were interacting with, there were many dangerous groups within the students, and your life was literally in danger. If you ended up on the wrong side of certain groups, some really nasty things could happen to you. To put it in practical or mundane terms, nothing, something that you could understand on more immediate problems rather than something related to supernatural within this context. So, depending on who you were hanging out with, etc., the days could be either somewhat decent or it could be really troublesome. It was during one of those days that I was walking around the place, and it was somewhat dangerous to be alone. So you were looking for someone who was not busy with some activity or making out or having sex with someone. This was back in high school. So some of were doing all sorts of questionable acts like taking drugs, sleeping around without regards to the consequences, that is sexually transmitted diseases, pregnancies, etc. So I was there and I was looking for someone to hang out with, and there was this guy. He wasn't. Well, it's very difficult to say that he wasn't the worst of the bunch because he was still quite psychotic. He's the type of person that could easily murder someone, to be honest. He was an overweight guy. There is a character in Silent Hill, in the Silent Hill 2, that is called Eddie Dombrowski. Maybe some of you have heard of him. You know, he's this kind of like guy with a weight problem, and he was exactly like that, that looked like a violent big kid of sorts. Although it was there were physical differences. This guy, let's call him Jay. Jay was had darker hair. His skin was a bit darker, but he was pretty much, he kind of resembled Eddie Dombrowski just a bit. I think in throughout my school years, there was someone else who fit the bill a bit better, at least physically and mentally, but this one also came pretty close. So this guy was dangerous and funny because, for example, he was always trying to get into a fight somehow if you ended up saying something that he didn't like. Not insulting him, just like if you said something that went against his beliefs, he would immediately attack you in a very ridiculous way. He was basically trying to aim for the family jewels. He was trying to hit you below there. So it was really funny. I don't know, maybe mm, someone in his family told him that the easiest way to take down someone was to hit him in the crotch, but he was always trying to hit you in the balls. So, which is a very, it's in a street fight, in a self defense situation. It does have its uses, but it's somewhat expected. It's more practical to attack the kneecaps. For example, Bruce Lee always recommended that you should use the low kick towards the opponent kneecap, or you could even attack the torso or the face, because you usually almost always try to protect your vulnerable areas. So it was a very odd choice of him that he always tried to pick a fight with you, and he always tried to hit you in the nuts. The other thing that made him even more dangerous was when you were in a pool or a lake, because he was really heavy. He always tried to drown people. He was quite psychotic. There were a few times that he almost managed to do that. So he was very unhinged. So just to put things into context, to understand the situation, of all of the people gathered here, he was one of the most decent guys there. So I'm telling you. So I basically just approached him and started to talk with him, and we started to talk about video games, etc. I started to talk about different Lovecraft stories. I don't know if he actually got into Lovecraft. I don't think he embraced it, the fiction, because I thought maybe because he's a bit crazy, he likes like creepy things, and he did like creepy things, but he was not a good listener. And that's a very sad thing, in my opinion. When you talk with someone, you gain more from them if you are actually paying attention and you let them talk. Like in this case, I actually got to know Silent Hill because I listened to his conversation, but he didn't listen too much to my conversation, so he is missing out on Lovecraft. Although, considering his sanity level, so to speak, maybe he also failed to enjoy many things. Well, we started to talk about video games. Like I told you, I tried to introduce Lovecraft into the conversation. He didn't seem too interested. He did get into some aspects of the mythos, but he immediately tried to steer the conversation towards Silent Hill, because he told me like, way, in Spanish, a lot of people that are considered like low category, that is not very decent people, they call everyone way, which is kind of like, it's kind of like saying man, but at the same time it's an insult. So he told me, why do you know about Silent Hill? And I was like, no, I've seen it in some magazines, but I have never played it. And he started to tell me about all of the awesome things about Silent Hill, and I was just hooked. I was listening to his conversation. I was thinking, wow, I have to play this game. And because this guy that is pretty nuts, he's pretty crazy. He's recommending this to me. That game is probably quite scary, quite serious, because he actually he admired the creepy and dark aspects of it. So after that trip ended, I managed to get a copy of Silent Hill 1. So now we begin as I talk to you about how that game influences my role-playing game experiences, how I've subjected my players to different scary situations in horror role-playing games, how I have tried to appreciate the horror aesthetic of Silent Hill and other games, but mainly because of Silent Hill's influence on me. And I'm also going to recommend some things as to how you can handle things in role-playing games. Well, this video may contain some minor spoilers. I'm going to avoid spoilers as much as possible, so you can still enjoy Silent Hill 1, 2, 3, 4, and even 5, which is Homecoming. And so let's get started. For those of you that do not know about Silent Hill, it's a horrifying work of art. It takes influences from many things, many sources of inspiration, like for example, Jacob's Ladder, you know, that horror movie. Mm, it also has some very strong Clive Barker elements. So it mixes um, demons, concepts from other worlds, guilt, sadness with urban horror. It's a very surreal experience. You are constantly moving between two worlds. So let's start a bit with Silent Hill 1. In Silent Hill 1, the main horror element, well, there are two main horror elements. The quest of the main character, Harry Mason, he's looking for his daughter, Cheryl. During a trip to Silent Hill, he got into a car accident after a mysterious figure appeared in front of his car. He kind of like tried to avoid that person and he ended up crashing. So when he woke up from the accident, Cheryl was gone. Thankfully, he was not too injured. He just passed out from the impact, but he was somewhat intact or healthy despite the blow. And so he started to get into Silent Hill. Now I'm going to stop with the spoilers here for Silent Hill 1 because you really have to play the game to fully enjoy it, to really get into it, to feel the experience rather than just perceive it as a video game. There are so many elements of religion and dark cults within Silent Hill. There is always this sense that there is some sort of grand operation or ceremony going on in the background. Silent Hill also takes many inspirations from Stephen King. The entire town is quite foggy. Many of you know that it's because there were technical limitations, so the fog served a double purpose of creating that creepy atmosphere, but at the same time it gave the game a chance to process the elements that were taking shape as you were moving through the game, different buildings and enemies. So in Silent Hill, everything is so unknowable. And you find so many clues as to what is going on. Much like many modern video games or even some novels like in Bram Stoker's Dracula, you see things as they are revealed to you through documents, journals, although here they also add newspaper clippings, and things are kept quite ambiguous. After piecing all of it together, you start to make sense of the entire plotline. But it's quite open to interpretation. Despite that, there are so many fan theories out there. Sometimes people try to push their own vision of what happens in Silent Hill, but nothing is certain. Like, for example, there is an error in the North American release of Silent Hill. Because of a game bug, a crucial piece of information or evidence is missing, a newspaper clipping. So because that is missing, many American gamers thought that a particular cultist in the game was responsible for something really horrible that happened to one of the central characters. But that newspaper clipping points to it as if it was just an accident. Basically, a boiler exploded and something happened. And so, like I said, that still doesn't prove that that actually happened. Maybe there was some sort of error of information or disinformation. Maybe the character involved told the police that that was what actually happened, or planted some things, some evidence to make it look as if it was some sort of freak accident. Well, like I said, it's quite open to interpretation. When it comes to role-playing game systems that you can use to represent Silent Hill, you really need a universal system or a horror role-playing game that is quite gritty. Silent Hill, if you are a very skilled player, it's actually quite easy when you fight the normal enemies. The enemy bosses do present more challenge, but normal enemies, they are somewhat easy to take down once you get used to the clunky mechanics. Your character, because you are a normal guy, you fight in a very clunky way, somewhat clumsy, but you have lots of ammo, healing items. The melee weapons are quite decent in my opinion. You have lots of range with them. The better weapons give you a lot of range to your attack. They are quite long. So you can become somewhat of an expert in Silent Hill combat. So in that sense, it's somewhat of an easy game. But what really gets to you is the entire atmosphere. The game constantly shifts between the normal world and a nightmarish, burnt out, rusty version of the real world. It's actually a bit funny because I've been to some places in real life that look exactly like Jacob's ladder sort of place with pieces of buildings and walls all like decayed and it looks like they are starting to crumble. Some places have metal exposed, rusty metal. Where I live, there's actually a bridge that when you walk across it, I can only imagine how it feels like when you're walking at night. But one afternoon I had to cross it. It was the sun was still out, and it was just this dark passageway with all sorts of fences and metal pieces exposed from the ceiling of the bridge or the supports above. There were all of these. There are these like wires and metal pieces, and it looks quite hellish. So that reminds me of Silent Hill. So in Silent Hill, you have all of those that shifting of the aesthetic experience when you are moving in the real world, and suddenly things shift, and you are in this strange world of exposed rusty metal. Everything looks burned down, the walls, the ceiling, the floor. Sometimes some really nightmarish things happen. You find rooms covered in insects, and of course the monsters are more frequent. The encounters are more frequent in that version of the world. And the enemies in Silent Hill are very are horrifyingly beautiful because they express some sort of deeper meaning related to the storyline or to psychology. So some enemies, they do not have faces, they have very suggestive movements and parts of their bodies. And so when you start to read about the lore, you see that this enemy represents some sort of sexual abuse. You see that this other enemy represents an overbearing personality that affected one of the characters in the game. There are so many bad things trapped within Silent Hill, within the town itself. In a sense, it feels a bit like Ravenloft. For those of you that do not know about the Dungeons and Dragons setting of Ravenloft, at least the old school version, there is somewhat of a debate. You do not know if the demi-plane of dread, this pocket plane, works as a sort of prison, prison of justice to contain all of the bad people of different campaign settings, different universes. So Silent Hill is a bit like that. You do not know if the powers of Silent Hill act as a sort of prison to keep some bad things inside. A lot of you could say that there are some fan theories that say that Silent Hill is just like it's an accident, that everything happened just like that. So you can take a look at Silent Hill and find out for yourself the truth, the interpretation as to why things are happening the way that they are occurring. All of those enemies are tied to the dark rituals that took place in Silent Hill, but also sometimes they are tied to the characters themselves. For example, let's move towards Silent Hill 2. Silent Hill 2 has a strong theme of guilt. It's somewhat obvious almost early on in the game that all of the normal people but they are far from normal. All the normal people that are going to Silent Hill, they are there to find some sort of resolution, perhaps even atonement, because of things that happened in their past. And you start to see the enemies, the appearances of different stages. They are related to their personal problems, their issues. That's part of the mystery of the game. You start to think, what is the past of the main character? Why is he in Silent Hill? This is very specific to Silent Hill 2. In Silent Hill 1 and other games that were not designed by the original Team Silent, you see that you can also end up in Silent Hill without having some sort of secret concerning something that you did or that you experienced. So in Silent Hill 2, you can see that the town of Silent Hill also somewhat torments its visitors and its inhabitants. When it comes to role-playing games, you could use a system that is very gritty, both in health and in sanity. Like I said, you can become quite skilled in combat in Silent Hill, but your characters will still die if they take too many hits. They are not exactly like the typical tough guy in many video games. You're a normal person, and if you get hit too many times, like I don't remember the exact number, it depends on the attack as well, but let's say that they hit you 4 times and you're 4 or 5 times, you could end up dying pretty soon. Mm. You also need a sanity system, in my opinion, to represent the impact on the player. Sometimes, like I told you, Silent Hill is somewhat easy in some encounters, but because sometimes you kind of freak out because of the things that you see, there are some minor jump scares, but most of the time you see this terrifying landscape or the design of the enemies. They kind of look like those figures that McFarlane released a few years back, Tortured Souls, if I'm not mistaken. When I saw those figures, some of them, I thought that they were, like I said, monstrously beautiful because of the things that they were expressing, but at the same time they were quite disgusting. I actually have one. It's Moribundi, which is basically a guy with mutilated body parts hanging from some sort of metal arrangement and some medical equipment connected to him, and he's supposed to represent humanity sacrificed to the altar of technology, which is quite nightmarish. So in Silent Hill you see all of those different corpses, many things related to body horror. They are pierced by barbed wire. Sometimes they are just shackled or kept in some sort of cage within walls. In many ways, the best Silent Hill games or the best Silent Hill moments, they feel like you are entering this museum of horrors. There are empty rooms that are just there to express something or to scare you. This also is a great source of inspiration for role-playing games. As a game master, as a referee, you could design some empty rooms. Perhaps you are generating some sort of adventure site randomly using some whatever table that you wish. So maybe you rolled to see the results and you got an empty room, but you can make rolls in other tables or come up with your own elements, your own results to place some disturbing things just there, like in Silent Hill. Some corpses will not attack you. They are not enemies. They are just there to unnerve you, to perhaps reveal some things related to the storyline, to one of the problems or personalities of the player characters, the main participants in the story. So yes, I think Silent Hill has had a very strong impact when it comes to how I design different horror adventure sites. Every time I roll an empty room, I always add like this blood stain there, or this corpse placed in some sort of strange pose or position, or just lying there with no explanation as to what killed that corpse. Sometimes the players, like with many other ambiguous video games, they come up with their own explanations as to what happened with that corpse. Or maybe you decide to play some creepy sculptures or objects and they start to create a story based on their own thought processes, and you can add that to reinforce some other elements in the plot line of your particular game. This could affect the entire adventure or even a complete campaign. So like I said, Silent Hill 2 has a stronger focus on guilt, on exploring the past, the dark secrets of different characters. I think KULT Divinity Lost, if you haven't seen my review of that tabletop role-playing game, I'm going to put it in the description below. There is currently sorry, what is the bundle of holding. It has the complete collection of KULT Divinity Lost so far, so I recommend that you check that out. I'm going to put my entire playlist, in fact, of KULT reviews, so you can learn more about that role-playing game. It's perfect for a Silent Hill type of experience. In fact, I think that's probably the best role-playing game that you can play to have an experience similar to Silent Hill. Although I think some systems could also work, like, for example, Savage Worlds, using the horror companion and using the grittiest settings or optional rules. But KULT Divinity Lost definitely has a very strong Silent Hill vibe to it, with their cults, their dark past, etc. Now let's move a bit towards Silent Hill 3. Silent Hill 3 is quite connected to Silent Hill 1. There are some direct connections that I won't mention to avoid spoilers, but it's kind of like returning to that emphasis on sort of like diabolical cults and religions. There's a lot of Christian horror, in my opinion, in Silent Hill. There are some important connections related to demons and angels. So if you're looking for that, probably Silent Hill 1 and 3 are going to be the major sources of inspiration. Silent Hill 2 feels a bit more psychological, but Silent Hill 1 and 3, it's perfect to use as inspiration in some low magic, dark sorcery sort of role-playing game. So for example, I'm going to put a link in the description below to a few horror game recommendations, my list of 5 Paranormal Investigation role-playing games. You could use it in perhaps Silent Legions to have this experience of the player characters exploring a town or a city, and they start to find out the truth about some ritual that was carried out, some ceremony that happened, and you could have some ritual effects, not a more spectacular magic of throwing fireballs and thunderbolts, but rather some long ceremonies and rituals that can summon something into this world. That's the sort of experience that you can find in Silent Hill 1 and 3. Now when it comes to Silent Hill 4, it's also quite a fascinating game overall. Some people do not like it as much, but I think that it does a great job at combining both the psychological aspect and the ritualistic aspect. You have a main character that is somewhat of not exactly a shut-in, but he's doing his own thing, doesn't enjoy too much interaction with other people, and suddenly he ends up trapped inside his room, his apartment. You start to find many disturbing things, find out many horrible things about the past of that room. You start to understand why you are locked in. You see this ritual process that started way back in the past, and it's still running. It is undergoing a sort of transformative effect that involves the player character, the main character. There are many things related to psychology as when it comes to isolation, awkwardness. Although I think that also connects quite strongly with Silent Hill 2, but like I said, Silent Hill 4, The Room, it kind of meshes all of those things together. I think that maybe the team behind it tried to accomplish that. But there are also these many ritualistic elements, the sacraments of the game. You see that people are dying, but they are dying because of a purpose. They are dying with a greater function or objective in mind. Now when it comes to the following game, which is Silent Hill Homecoming, I think that only a few members of the original team participated in creating that game, but I still enjoyed it. I think they stepped a bit away from the original ritualistic concepts in order to bring some more lodge or order or brotherhood oriented concepts. You start to find things about this secret covenant, or like I said, a sort of order or brotherhood, or lodge of sorts, that started to put some very nasty things into motion that actually caused the main character to have some family issues. If I give more details, it's going to spoil the entire plotline. But if you like those, yeah, the dark past of Silent Hill, what was the catalyst for everything that was going wrong, perhaps even before the thing that happened during Silent Hill 1 and in connection with 3, that's a good game to play. I think some people will not like the story because it feels somewhat separated from Silent Hill 1, 2, 3, and even 4. Now, when it comes to the following games in the series, I think they went completely off rails. They do not respect much of the lore. They feel like a completely different experience. Only the prequel Silent Hill Origins, because it connects to directly to Silent Hill 1, I think it's worth playing. It's going to feel different, but there's a subtle thread. While in Silent Hill Downpour and the other games, they feel so distant because of the design of the enemies, the design of the different creatures encountered, which look like kind of like crazy corpses, so to speak. Sometimes they're kind of like zombies, but they move really fast, and their colors, they express some sort of otherworldliness to them, not necessarily the rotting corpse sort of enemy, but they still do not express all of those meanings related to psychology, to the plotline, the past, or the dark secrets of the characters. So I didn't actually play that one. I saw many videos about it and read about it, and I prefer to skip it. Maybe one day I will play it, but in the meantime, I have so many fond memories of Silent Hill 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and the prequel Origins. So if you're looking for inspiration, you definitely need to play those Silent Hill games. They will, as a game master, you're going to create so many terrifying adventures and campaigns with them. And as a player, if you're participating in a role-playing game as a player character, you know how to better role-play your character, how to react to different moments. In fact, sometimes the main characters, because of different issues, it adds to the unnerving aura of the game, or the sort of like an alien feeling, that they do not react as you would normally react to horrifying situations. Sometimes this bad thing happens, or this scary thing, and your main character is kind of like, oh no. So maybe you think, oh, that's terrible voice acting on the part of the actors behind the game. But other times you could think, oh, that character is so disturbed or so damaged internally that he no longer reacts to different disturbing things as you would normally react, being a sane person. So maybe they ended up damaged or jaded to different horror experiences. So maybe you could roleplay a character like that. Another really awesome thing when it comes to the different Silent Hill games that you can use if you are a game master, despite having all of those scary and horrifying moments, Silent Hill is really fun. Because if you're exploring a hospital or a school, pretty much any place in Silent Hill, the entire town, moving through different streets and parks and graveyards, there is always some detail. There are some empty spaces, but you just want to go into that room to see what you find about the story, or to appreciate the art. Like I told you, there are many disturbing things, some corpses, or ancient objects, ritualistic relics, items, and you just stare at those things while you are in the room, and you start to wonder. You let your mind explore many possibilities when it comes to the plot line of the game. How does that corpse relate to the story? What does it tell you about the main character, or about some of the other secondary characters? Is there some sort of clue that will allow you to make progress in the game there? Some subtle hint, or that points to some of the greater mysteries in the story. And so that was just amazing. I wanted to explore all of Silent Hill. I think I explored all of the different rooms and areas in all of the games. Mm, and just playing it at night, there was one time that I was playing Silent Hill 2, and it was like 2:30 one Friday night, and I was moving through this prison area, and suddenly my character got locked inside of a cell, and you could hear this like whistling, like a ghostly whistling or sound outside of the cell, as if some sort of entity locked you inside. And there was this room where you had to literally get your hand inside of different corpses that were just standing there as some sort of museum of horrors. They were placed like mannequins. They were wrapped in these yellowish, brownish shrouds. You couldn't see their faces either. And I was just terrified. I was thinking, oh, one of those corpses is going to move and attack me. Sometimes some of the characters log you into a room with some horrifying thing that is hanging from the ceiling, and you have to fight it. So definitely play Silent Hill. If you have never played a Silent Hill video game, you don't know what you're missing when it comes to a deeper psychological horror experience with all of those ritualistic and religious elements. And like I said, definitely try playing a Silent Hill sort of game using KULT, Divinity Lost. Any system that is of a universal or generic nature that you can adapt. Perhaps I haven't played it like that, but perhaps GURPS works with Silent Hill. Or like I said, Savage Worlds, you could use that. Or maybe just play your typical Dungeons and Dragons game and add some elements of Silent Hill. Perhaps you could use one of those supplements or expansions that allow you to play Dungeons and Dragons in modern times. Or you could purchase one of those games that are pretty much old school Dungeons and Dragons with the setting already integrated into them, like Silent Legions, and you can recreate that Silent Hill horror experience. Well, thanks for watching this video. If you have any comments or questions, please let me know. I hope you have a happy Halloween. And if you haven't seen it already, remember that in my other video, I'm going to link it in the description below. I have a list of all of the different things that you can click on in Drivethrurpg to get all sorts of free role-playing games, free modules. I think I have found them all. If you have seen other free stuff there that I am not aware of when it comes to the Halloween freebies, please let us know in the comments section of that video or below this one. But yeah, definitely get your free stuff. Check out that link to take advantage of those games. Some of them are really good. And thank you so much to those of you that have been sending Drivethrurpg gift certificates. If anyone else wants to further support the channel, the information how to do that will be in the description below. Once again, thank you and see you later.